Please join me in welcoming the Director, Head of Markets and Corporate Affairs, Vietnam and Cambodia, KPMG in Vietnam, Mr. Trần Thanh Tâm, for his keynote, The Growth Paradox. The economy is growing 8%. Why doesn't your P&L feel it? Please join me in welcoming Mr. Trần Thanh Tâm.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just want to have a quick time check to see how much time I have, because I think we are running a bit of time. Okay, so I'll try to keep it short, maybe 10, 15 minutes. I think I have a lot of pressures today because I think Rohit and Jessica, I think they actually did a great job, and I think we have a very interesting lineup for the event. So my name is Tam. I'm in the markets and corporate affairs for KPMG in Vietnam, Cambodia. I've been with the firms for over a decade. My job is actually looking after growth and really connecting between the people who are building the brands and people who are making spreadsheets. I'll promise all of you today. So whatever I'm presenting, there's no accounting jargon. There will be a couple of interesting slides whereby you can steal and present in your next leadership meeting. And lastly, I think there will be some uncomfortable conclusions toward the marketing budgets that we are about to discuss today. All right, so I will start first with the situations we are having today. Last year in April, in April, so the Liberation Day was actually very, very famous. I think we don't need to tell who's that gentleman on the screen. So, he made one of the very big decisions whereby he putting a tariff on probably about 90 countries across the whole world. And that's including Vietnam and Cambodia, where I am basically in charge of. And Vietnam and Cambodia actually on top of that particular tariff ladder. And that's actually impacting a lot in terms of the supply chain, the cost of goods sold, and also in terms of how we are sourcing our material and products. The second thing when you're looking into on this particular screen is in terms of financing and input cost. Now, if you're thinking again, being a CMO, a marketeer, and you are doing a lot of event, opening new stores, launching new products in the market. Now, the money is not just about how many riches that you have, what the coverage and the brand in terms of the awareness and all. Every dollars you are putting into these kind of activities, there's an impact on cost because the money is being borrowed. If you're seeing here, I think yesterday, the borrowing rate is actually about 11 to 12% fixed rate. If any of you here are actually doing a small and medium-sized business, or if you're actually borrowing to finance for your mortgage, and floating rate today is about 15, 16%. And what you're seeing on this particular screen, if you see the input cost today, I think if we're looking into the credit growth, it's about 19%, where the deposit is growing at 14%. Money is getting more and more expensive as we speak today. I'm not sure even tomorrow whether we can see a lower interest rate for our business. The third point, this particular lady is actually doing a live stream on selling crab online, right at her pond in China. So now we are starting to see, I think we already see it, and I think many of the business here already seen it. We are now no longer competing with the shop across the street. Our offline business is now competing with online business. Our onshore business is competing with offshore business. A lot of time, I think we are as customer, we are seeing that we can buy stuff from China and then we receive it at our doors even faster than we are sourcing or buying goods here in Vietnam. I think we need to look into that as one of the areas. And the last point in terms of compliance, this is what KPMG does. I'm actually very happy to put it here. I think in Rohit's presentation today, if you attend this particular MMA 3 years ago, we're talking about Decree 13 on personal data protections. And it's now become a law, it's real. This month, if you fail to comply, I think the Ministry of Public Affairs is talking about up to 5% of your revenue, not your profit. And it's very, very significant. And if you are doing a lot of the business selling to mom and pop shops, for example, now you need to have e-invoice. You have to pay tax. You need to comply to a lot of the country regulatory changes. And that will park up your costs, let alone investment into technology. AI is now a significant part of your particular conversation with your CFO and your CEO. Okay, so now we are going to the paradox, which I put up as the headlines for my speech. So what happened is, if you look into Vietnam, 8% growth. So today, as I'm traveling by Grab to this particular venue, I asked the Grab driver, how's your business? And as usual, they say, business is tough. Now, this is what we are seeing. Vietnam GDP growth in 2025 is 8%. And if we're looking into the first half of 2026, it's 8.05, even faster than last year. Do you feel it? I think at the beginning of the slides, we're seeing some of the TikTok and some of the online business that might be growing double digit. And this is another issue that we are facing. So if we deconstruct this particular GDP, we are seeing that the majority, the significant part of our GDP is actually come from export manufacturing. We're talking about the FDI, the foreign invested entities, that is exporting significantly to the world as they're looking to Vietnam as the factory and production base. Thinking about the life of Samsung, I'm sure they're here. More than half of the Samsung World mobile phone was manufactured in Vietnam and exported to the world. It's not so much being consumed here. 170% of the total trade is actually import and export. And then if you look into this particular thing, if you look at the domestic consumption is actually probably a tier 3 or tier 4 in terms of the GDP deconstruct. The problem we are seeing, despite the whole GDP is being fueled by FDI, manufacturing export, we are hiring exactly the same talent with those factories. We are paying for the exactly same fuel price as those factories. We are consuming exactly the same electricity and utilities as those factories. And lastly, the money that we are borrowing to fuel our particular business activities, we are also competing against those FDIs. If you look into some of the multinational companies established and operate in Vietnam, they come to Vietnam with the technology, with the know-how, setting up big factory, but they also bring along their vendor, supplier, tier 1, tier 2, and they will be a closed ecosystem of productions all the way from material input, all the way to the export to the market. So the value that we retain in the country is actually very, very small unless we are moving up the value chain. So now that's sort of the uncomfortable truths that we are seeing and why 8% of the GDP growth translate into what we are seeing today. And if you are a double-digit growth business like an online business, digital platform, really think about this. If you grew last year 200%, and this year Vietnam GDP is actually growing better than last year, are you comfortable to set up a KPI even faster than last year or not? I think that's also the areas where you need to look into. So as KPMG, again, our logos, we have 4 boxes. I think I'm very happy to put these boxes onto this particular slides. So what happened, these are probably the paradox and interesting part, where I think if you look into the previous slides, the paradox being is like the GDP is growing 8%. You are not invited, and if that GDP is a party, like what we're doing here, you are being invited, you are not being invited to the party, but you have to pay for the catering cost. And that's what the former slide show. So the other thing that, as I discussed, I think as we discussed with a lot of business, and we say, so what's the solution for business? How we are looking into the future and how do we capture that particular growth aspects? So there's a couple of things. These 4 boxes, I think they are the 4 super cycles that will be impacting your P&L one way or the other. And this is not just the global trends, it's not just the global super cycles, it's here being localized. Here is also a time bound. The reform is happening right now. The capital markets is happening in 12 to 18 months. The infrastructure that you'll be seeing in 3 to 5 years, and the demographic will be changing from 2030 onwards. I think that's sort of the sequence of these super cycles. The reforms. So I think since Tolam came into the positions of the Secretary General of the country, I think one of the things you have to admit, there has been a lot of change in the regulations in terms of how actually the government looking into business and sort of revive and actually help Vietnam to develop. And we can't do that in an ad hoc basis, but there needs to be a mechanism and a framework on how's that going to happen. The very first things, I think we're not going to delve into this, but there's actually a lot of resolutions in terms of the FDI, how we are moving on the value chain in terms of the value creations, and also in terms of the resolutions for the private enterprise, resolution 68, which is actually very, I think, very important, whereby I think the country is looking to develop the next 20 business that can compete globally and also regionally. The second thing is we look into the map of Vietnam and we're looking into where sort of the industry are being clustered. So I think one of the biggest reforms that we're seeing last year is the mergers of province, and the number of resolutions here, people say, is probably one of the most significant reforms that the country have observed over the last 35 years. And it will create a lot of industry clusters, factories, if you look in North and South, and that will actually help boom sort of the middle income class, creating more jobs, more middle income class, and actually that will be the sort of the blue oceans for most of the business that we're seeing. So what this implies, apart from the urbanizations, it will be creating economic centers and not just sort of the TOD, the transit-oriented development as we're seeing in some of the mega cities, but this is where one of the areas that it could potentially create more, probably a new addressable markets for your brands. So if you're looking into some of these clusters and you think Bac Ninh, Bac Giang, Long An, that's a tier 2 market. So my strategy is to bring my product that I have a mass market and just give a discount. And you think you can win that? The consumer here, they are middle income class. They can actually, spend first on education, some of the experience, and they want to make sort of the personal sort of the brand identities for themselves. And that is something that we could potentially consider. Number 2, this is my tough. The capital markets. So I think as I mentioned in the challenge slides in the beginning, if you're looking here, this is a slide I prepared last month. I think the economies in Vietnam is basically using a short-term loans, bank loans, to fuel and operate. And if you're looking at the fluctuations of the banking situation, the interest rate, you're borrowing 10% today, but you might pay 15% next year. And that will affect sort of your budgeting, planning sort of cost cycle. I think the number I looked into yesterday is probably about 154%. It's heavily rely on the banking system. And this is something that the country is looking to change. If you're reading on the news on the international financial centers, the government is now looking at the short-term financing structure into something on mid or long term. And that is something that we need to do in order to survive. The other thing is the FTSE emerging markets upgrade. So from September this year, Vietnam will be uplift to emerging markets, and that will attract roughly about $5 billion of passive capital flow into the country. This year we failed the Morgan Stanley Capital International, but that will be reviewed again next year. And if the Morgan Stanley will be approved, there will be another $25 billion will be flowing into the country. The question is, how are you going to capture that? Because that will be a much cheaper cost of capital compared to the bank loans that you are seeing here. The lucky thing is that these indexes, they actually have a checklist. And if your company fulfills these checklists, the money will come to you. So I think I really encourage you to actually put more attention and look into that particular scheme. So this particular super cycle is actually happening in the next 12 to 18 months. Prepare now, because these international investor and money, they will have a different lens and angles into how you can actually capture that particular capital flow. I think that's really help. And I think you can go back to your CFO, you can go back to your CEO, say, do this, because instead of borrowing from the bank at 10%, you can get at 3-4%. Big help. The super cycle number 3, infrastructure. I think we've been talking about this for many, many years. Some of you have been here, and you know the Longtan International Airport has been a 20 years old story. But worry not, it's coming to life. I think probably end of this year, next year, it will become the real thing. We are looking, one of the things is, as a business, you will be competing on the spend in terms of the public spend on infrastructure. So yesterday, I think Vingroup Masan Masterized Techcombank has been asking for 1 trillion billion Vietnam dong to fund a lot of projects. And now where's the bank get that money from? You know, big pressures. And if the government say, you know, spend on this infrastructure, then there will be a very big pressures on your borrowing. So what happened? This is what's happening, and then there's a significant part of the infrastructure upgrade in the next 3 to 5 years. 60% of that will go into the energy transitions. The second thing, if we are looking into infrastructure, is not the brick and mortar business. It's the digital space. Now, I'm sure 90%, if not 99% of people in this room already have the VNEID, and your business too. There's nothing to hide. Everything you do is now being exposed, being monitored, being captured. And there's a cost in case if you are non-compliant to this particular digital infrastructure space. And it will come. Think about all the e-invoice, all the tax that you have to pay, and you're not paying personal income tax, you will stop at the airport and not being able to depart. So this is something that will connect the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure will move Vietnam to a very different place. If you're looking into this, what does that mean? So with improved infrastructure, your cost of logistics and the distribution channel will change. You know, we are talking about, instead of having a 60, 100-kilometer distribution network, you might be looking at actually a longer range, because now you can actually shipping your inventory to different locations in a much better, more efficient locations. But also at the same time, if you're looking into your e-invoice tax payment compliant, it's actually help you to define how responsible you are as a business and as individual and consumer. Now, what's good about this? That's put a lot of challenge on the traditional sort of retail channel and mom and pop shops. Because this, together with the urbanizations and the reform, will probably help to escalate the modern trade channels and other trade channels that beyond the traditional. And we are seeing that will be accelerating a lot faster. And lastly, the demographics. And I think, you know, for most of the people in the room, and I used to be in the market research, I think when we are presenting consumer clients, we always put the demographic as one of the first slides. But for this, I'm actually putting it at the end. So if we're already talking about Vietnam being a middle income, the government is actually looking to move the Vietnam to a high income class by 2045. So how could they do it? We already see that, you know, we start to see that the middle income and the high income start to expand, where the low income groups start to reduce. But at the same time, I think the challenge is here. We've been talking about Vietnam being a golden population. And that's why a lot of factories come to Vietnam, because of the labor, young workforce, cheap labor, so on and so forth. But you start to see that the bottom of this pyramid is getting smaller. People are aging at much faster speed than how they actually supply to this particular bottom of the pyramid, the base. The questions we're having now, are we getting rich before we're getting old? Right? And that will have implications to a lot of the categories that you're doing. The population stay probably more or less the same 100 million people, but their consumer consumption spend will change. We are talking about premiumizations. We are talking about being value for money. And I guess that gel a lot with what you are spending today. But that is something that we need to look beyond. If we are looking in 2030, I think this is one of the things. People want to live more green. They're focused more on the health and particular safety. So this is, I think if you're looking into these demographics, I think it's very important to define the segment where you play, not now, but in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. So in summary, so you see there's some of these super cycle, they will be affecting your P&L one way or the other. But I think the very important takeaway for us, if we're looking at some of these drivers for these super cycles, how do we play, where do we play in order to make sure that we capture that 8%? I think it's very important, and even if you're not growing, I think there's also a very good lens into it where you're speaking with your CEO and your CFO. You can actually defend on some of the spending items on why we should be keeping it, maintaining it, or should we drop it. So that's probably particular my sharing, and I think it's time's up. I think we leave the question to the end, but otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you to